Thank you. At this time, we'd like to call to order the Finance Committee meeting of the City of Palo Alto for Tuesday, August 15th, 2023. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Chair Burt.
Here.
Councilmember Livcott-Hames. Here. Vice Mayor Stone is absent.
Okay. Well, we hope Vice Mayor Stone will be able to join us shortly. We have two items tonight. Before that, we have an opportunity for the public to speak on any item that is not otherwise on the agenda, but is under the purview of this committee. Do we have any speakers?
Chair, we have no request to speak.
Okay. So we'll move on to our first item, which is a staff request for Finance Committee discussion for Chief Financial Officer recruitment and input of candidates' key characteristics. And good evening. Who will kick this off?
Sure. So I will start. So Kylie Nose, Assistant City Manager. And with us this evening, we have Terry Black, one of our executive recruiters that is helping us and running this recruitment or will run this recruitment, as well as Sandra Blanche, our HR Director. With you in your packet, you just have general information about the position. It is a municipal code position, so you do have the job description from that perspective, as well as some information about the department and the various activities of it. With that, I will turn it over to Terry.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you so much for making time on the agenda for me tonight as we undergo and embark on this very, very important recruitment for the city. My firm has a lot of experience working with Palo Alto, and in the last couple of years recruited a number of finance director, CFO types, serving cities in the region such as South San Francisco, Mountain View, Los Gatos, on the East Bay, the city of Pleasanton, good evening, and the city of San Leandro just in the last 24 months or so. So the purpose of me being here tonight is to get feedback from you all and what you'd like to see in the next CFO, the qualities, characteristics, type of experience that are most important to you. And we can certainly talk about the process. And at the end, I'd like to highlight some of what the talent market looks like right now. We use this information in a number of ways. We're of course getting feedback from the finance committee. We'll also, of course, talk to Kylie and Ed and members of the finance department or admin services department, because the fit is really, really important. We're not looking for just any outstanding candidate. This has to be an absolute great fit for Palo Alto. And anytime we're doing recruitments for Palo Alto, we're keenly aware that the standards are exceptionally high. The expectations are very ambitious. And so that's a different type of candidate than your average CFO or finance director, if you will. But we use this information to create our marketing and advertising materials, predominantly to have very informed and enriching discussions with potential candidates. The best candidates are going to have a lot of questions, be very curious, and want to have deep discussions with the recruiting team as they decide whether this is going to be the right potential fit for them. So we use the feedback that way. It also helps inform the different interview questions we use at different stages of the process, and to a certain extent helps influence the reference check we do at the end of the process on the top candidate. So that's the purpose of us getting feedback from you all. So with that, I'll just open it up to you about the qualities that are most important in us to look for a successful CFO.
And I'd like to acknowledge that Vice Mayor Stone has joined us. So who would like to go first? Julie?
I will. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Ms. Black. Appreciate it. I've been on council for 8 months, and so Kylie is the only person I've known in this role. And I'm struck by the fact that she served as Administrative Services Director / CFO for 3.5 years, which was a period of time largely impacted by the pandemic. So my instinct is to ask Ms. Nose, what have you learned about this role? Does the job description comport with your understanding of what it is today? Are there aspects of it that need to be augmented or changed because we've now been through a fiscal crisis with a pandemic. Not to say we're going to have those things again, but what did we learn from these years when you were uniquely serving? And does the job description is it already amended to reflect whatever key insights you would have brought to it? That's my biggest question, probably. Thank you.
Oh, boy. Chair, would you like me to respond? Sure. Thank you for the question, council member. I would say that the last few years have been obviously trying. But I would say the skills necessary to navigate those years are the same as you would want any year. It's heightened during that period of time that we went through, but you in this role are going to want someone who's adaptable, who understands and is willing to acknowledge the patterns or the priorities of the organization and adapt to support those. It truly is a strategic partner role in the organization. Oftentimes people say that it's, the finance director is always the one that says no. And one of the things for me that has always been important is maybe you have to say no because there aren't enough funding or it doesn't match a policy, but help someone understand the path to success to meet the goal that they want. Maybe you can't get there in the way that they lined out, but what's the end goal? To move a project off the ground, to get something funded, to strategize on, vacant staffing or contract issues and move through the system with them to ultimately reach that goal. And I would say that that skill set is important, whether you're going through a pandemic and trying to adapt oodles of things, or you're going through your day-to-day trying to make sure that you're not only being fiscal stewards, which is the bread and butter of the department, but you're also working to constantly improve. You're working to learn what's new in the municipal finance world, or even the private finance world as it is applicable to the local governments. And that also ties back to, you're also looking at the same people. Right? You're recruiting people typically from colleges that have accounting or poli-sci or analytical type purviews. And those are the kinds of people that you also need to entice to come work. This is a job that's not necessarily out in the community, but you can find the community benefit and the tie to the community in the processes that you do because you're enabling those programs. And so you are competing in theory against the private sector in many aspects. You look at accountants, bread and butter to our accounting team. They're going to be looking not likely at government when they come out of college. They're going to be looking at one of the big four. They want an internship, right, with one of the big accounting firms, move on to consulting, iBanking, VCs. So you're actually looking for those same candidates, but want mission-driven work. So that's why I say the person in this role, I think the job description from the purview is in line essentially with what it is. It's I don't want to say the intangibles, but it's how you do that job description. I think that this organization will key in on in terms of being successful in supporting the organization and the council.
Just one other follow-up, if I may. Thank you. I was struck by how comprehensive the job description is. It's like, and that is under it, and that, and that, and that, and so on. And I guess 56 FTE reporting. Does it feel doable? I mean, I know it's hard to answer that, but you're really the only person who can answer that. Now is the time to say, I never slept. I mean, it was a pandemic again, so there were odd circumstances, but now is the time to say this piece doesn't really fit and would be better served reporting to a different senior manager. Anything like that?
Sure. I'm going to go with the pandemic. It's a really bad time to think about sleep because it was one of the more trying times, I will say, from a career perspective for me, although my prior role served me well in those sleepless nights. In terms of the purview, I would say, yes, it is broad, and small facets of it are sometimes in different departments, depending on where you go. But arguably, that's just moving around the edges. And so the biggest thing, in all honesty, that we've kind of debated and or talked about, and I think it really just depends on the type of person or candidate you get, and different city managers have done it differently, is with the budget office. When Jim Keane was here, there was a move to move the budget office from a transactional to an actual office of management and budget. And he hired a budget director at that time. And that director had dual reporting to the city manager and the CFO. And so it had a department home, but in terms of like functional work on a day-to-day basis, a lot more work with the city manager, because as this committee knows, the budget is a really big strategic document that the city manager's office is engaged in. I would argue, depending on who the ultimate candidate is and who your talent is internally, you can oscillate that structure. You have the FTEs that are already authorized at the levels that will allow that, and it allows the organization flexibility to meet candidates where they are, and make sure that you have the resources needed to help make those strategic decisions on such an important body of work. So I don't think it has to be changed, if I'm being honest. But I do think depending on who the ultimate finalist is, if they have a strong budget background, use it, let them help run that. But if they don't, if they've come up through an accounting background, then we may look at perhaps having a budget director, and with that dual reporting relationship to CMO and to ASD. Again, your current budget already authorizes all of that. It's just a vacant position, and we've left it vacant on purpose so that we could match skill sets with the needs of the organization. So that's a decision we can make once we get this candidate.
Yeah, thank you. Apologies for being late. I think Julie asked, kind of a question that I was also interested in, because I've only ever known Kylie in this role and have really appreciated Kylie's work. And I think, one, definitely what I'd be looking for is, I think, just somebody who is going to be proactive and very open to also kind of a bit of an educational role as well. I mean, I was very new to this idea of city budgets, and Kylie was always very, I think, again, very just kind of proactive at messaging me, being open for questions, one-on-one. So somebody who's really kind of a go-getter and who can understand probably the difference between doing a similar role in maybe a business or organization, where I would imagine people in decision-making who are making who they are advising are probably very experienced within that world already, and budgets and finances. So somebody who can kind of understand, I think, the unique role of this position within a city organization, and working with electeds and people who might be a little newer to some of this stuff, like I was. So I always really appreciated that, Kylie, and hope we can find someone who's also interested in that. I think your last point on somebody who can be, what was it, the budget director?
Right. So that's when I first came to the city, that's actually the structure the organization had. There was a CFO, an admin services director, but there was also a budget director. And that budget director actually sat on the executive leadership team, and had a dual reporting relationship with the city manager and the CFO at that time.
Okay.
So it was Walter Rossman. And then after Walter, it was me. And then it got, yeah, after Walter, it was me. And then the waters got a little muddy after Walter left and after Lalo left. And we just kind of let those dual roles play, because we were also then starting to enter COVID. And again, us being, sometimes we aren't good at advocating for ourselves. So I appreciate the question, Councilmember Scott-Hames, because we do try, as people who are looking at the numbers and the finances, sometimes we shoot ourselves in the foot by trying to stretch ourselves a little bit too thin. I will say, this department, if you think about the structure that's authorized, it does have a director, the CFO role, and essentially it has 3 assistant directors functionally. So 2 assistant directors that actually oversee the kind of day-to-day operations, and then 1 assistant director or budget director. It's the same, you can title it differently, same salary range. And so we have that flexibility. And so, that is a high level, frankly, across those 3 roles of executive oversight. And I'll say senior leadership and management in the department. So to your question of, it's a broad spectrum of roles and responsibilities, but there also is, it's not just one person. You do have that senior leadership, and then below that senior leadership, you do have division managers over the technical purviews. So you have a finance manager, a budget manager, a procurement manager, a revenue manager. So you do have kind of those building blocks to all ultimately roll up.
But if we get the right CFO, they can also play the role of the budget director.
They could. What I would say at that point is then you would have an assistant director that's focused and overseeing on budget.
Gosh. And if we have the budget director, then you no longer need that. So really, it's not an issue of saving money. It's just classification.
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yep. And it really matches with the skill set and or your population. When you come up in the municipal finance and or even private sector world, some people do like that forward facing, sitting at a meeting with electeds, going out in the community. And some people prefer the more analytical roles and the day-to-day operations. And by having this flexibility between budget and the CFO role, it allows you to match candidates in a really, frankly, difficult job market. If you have a CFO that's really great at communicating, but you have someone that's really good at getting a budget out, but maybe doesn't love the public side of it, then leaving them as an assistant director over the budget team functionally is really supportive for the organization. You as a council and the community have a clear communicator, you have a consistent face to have a discussion and dialogue with to build that credibility, while you've got solid staff providing the core work. However, if you have someone who perhaps is not ready to be a director overseeing 56 people, but you want to start training that next person for succession planning, pulling them up into that budget director role where they have that step up and out, have those conversations in these public forums, have a team that they're responsible for, sit with the executive leadership team and engage in those conversations. It's a great succession planning and training tool to help feed your pipeline in, again, a very difficult marketplace. So, like I said, it provides you the flexibility to meet your candidates and your employees where they are, especially because, like Terry said, these roles are not just about know-how. It's also about fit. It's also about engagement with the workforce, growing your internal talent, and also acknowledging where talent is in this field.
If I could just add, the magnitude of this department is pretty substantial, right? As you've indicated in different ways, that could be an attraction to the right candidates for the superhero that we're looking for, or it could be, somewhat of a turnoff. But I think we go out with the hopes of finding that magical person. But the nimbleness of Palo Alto is especially helpful from a recruiting standpoint, as Kylie indicated, because you can adjust, and the organization is willing to invest in people and their growth, which is how most successful organizations are retaining their talent, their best talent today. So we do appreciate the nimbleness, but having this substantial department of 56 people and these different divisions, a couple of them somewhat unique to finance, could be an attraction to the right person, to that superhero that we're looking for. So it helps it stand out from your typical CFO finance job.
Yeah, that all sounds great. Thanks for that.
Well, thanks. Thanks for both these questions and those responses. Those were really helpful. So first, I had not recalled that when we had that budget director role initially, it was kind of a dual reporting. It wasn't readily apparent to the council, and it's probably more behind the scenes sort of thing. And that's intriguing. I would say also, as we look at this breadth of responsibilities under this position, is the thought that we would be recruiting only within local government, or might we be looking into broader, not necessarily for-profit backgrounds, but broader backgrounds that may not have as much local government experience, but might have the skill set we're looking for?
Thank you for the question. We counsel all of our clients today to cast a wide net and be open-minded about the backgrounds and histories of where people are coming from. So in an ideal world, we'd get somebody with the perfect local government background who's a dynamo and a great leader. But I think we approach it being open-minded with a department of this size and the responsibilities that are part of this portfolio. That leadership skill has got to be very, very strong, and leaders can come from many different places. So without being too elaborate, we'll keep an open mind. It is just candidly, it would be a hard role to step into without any local government experience. There's not much of a honeymoon period in Palo Alto, right? The expectations are high. So the person would have to be super motivated to hit the ground running. But I think the city manager, and we're certainly open to non-traditional candidates.
Well, and then I was thinking about, there was a mention on kind of the hook for our candidates and what's the mission. And certainly we have the apparent mission, but what might candidates find particularly attractive about Palo Alto? And it has its cachet, but I would say beyond that, there may be a subset of really interesting candidates who might be in this era very intrigued by participating in our leading climate program. And I think that is a potential attraction to really be at the forefront of local government in that arena. And then just a few other thoughts. Greer had mentioned, and Kylie had kind of touched on this, the role of this position in being both kind of a financial mentor for the council when they come in, and really who explains stuff to council members who have a big range of backgrounds coming in, and even if they have business experience, local government finance is a different ballgame. And so I didn't see that part of the role laid out in the responsibilities, and maybe we would want to even call it out there. Kylie,
That's a good point. It's not in the specific job description or the municipal code, but I think you all have heard Ed talk about his executive competencies that he has as an expectation for his leadership team, and that's definitely one of them. So it's a good point that we should highlight that and call that out as one of the kind of key attributes.
And then one area that may be something that we want to really look for in a candidate is how that candidate can manage the natural tension between needing to operate and lead within a bureaucratic structure and do some of the things that Kylie was referring to on how do you make stuff happen, get to what we want to achieve while operating within those constraints. And I'm not sure how to capture that in a single description, but it's a concept that I think is really important. Not just maneuvering through in individual projects, but how do you also work to make the system have fewer barriers, just structurally. And that's a real challenge and kind of a constant challenge, but I think a really important one. Because without that, that deliberate effort, kind of the constraints of the bureaucracy kind of starts consuming how we do things, and it's always this work to overcome that and reduce that. It's going to be there. It's the nature of what we do. But what's that natural? I don't know if I want to call it tension, because what I want to see is it more lubricated. Yeah. So some way to capture that. And then one of the other things that I'd be interested in a candidate is that strategic financial experience. And I think point number 4 talks about participate in intermediate and long-range financial planning strategies. And I don't know that participate in is an adequate description, because this CFO, we're really looking for that person to lead in those areas. And one of the things when Julie was asking about, kind of the last few years, one of the things that I would extol is that making sure people come in with the experience that causes them to appreciate that the booms don't last forever. And then when things come tumbling down, that won't last forever either. And how do we adjust through those times and anticipate each of those trends reversing? When we have a downturn, I've for decades heard the refrain, it's a new normal. And it isn't. It's what the new normal is going to be new, but it's not that. It's the next thing that's the new normal. So having that frame of reference and mindset, I think are a couple of other things. So those were my additional thoughts. Do you want to loop back, Julie?
Thank you. I'm finding myself curious about our unique position as a city government that has its own utilities. And I'm wondering to what extent that impacts the recruitment for this role. I don't know to what extent the utilities aspect of the whole finances picture is different from the city side. So are we looking for someone that really has some kind of facility with utilities, or is it kind of an apples to apples? And we don't have to worry about that.
It's a good question. And I'm wondering if Dean is here, which he is. Happens chance, so lovely. Utilities is a different animal. We have the teams and the structures to help support that. So for example, we have a much larger, say, accounting or accounts payable team, because we have to manage both the ratepayer funding as well as your kind of general government typical funds. And, many cities do have some utilities, just not the full suite like we have. Where I actually think it becomes either an attractive challenge or a detractor is all of the cutting edge stuff that we want to do when it comes to utilities, the unique financing structures that we're talking about. We're not talking about, let's just go do a geo bond. We're not looking at, 1950s financing structures. We're like, how can we do something different? And so I think for the right candidate, that can be something that is super interesting. Nobody, frankly, in any industry has this figured out. We're all figuring it out in different ways and learning from each other. And so that can be a really big draw for someone. Or to Terry's point, maybe not, because it's a lot of unknowns. And oftentimes you'll find folks that are very cautious in the financial realm, especially if they came up through an audit background. That's just, ingrained in them, right? Segregation of duties. You see it in our audits. When you see P&S, right? Everyone has their role, and how do you check and balance that? So, it's a dance. It's a tightrope, I would say, that you're trying to balance as you're walking, because you want to keep those internal controls, because of course you don't want things to degrade to fraudulent activities, waste or abuse of anything. But it takes work to balance the other side of it and engage. Our utilities team, it has their own financial team as well, as you've seen the rate analysts that come in to do all of those. So this position isn't on their own when it comes to that. But it does add an extra complication. It adds orders of magnitude more in terms of risk and purview, just because we've got these, hundreds of millions of dollars of contracts and, purchasing things. And fiber is going to be a whole new thing. So, like I said, I think it can both be a draw as well as, to some, a body of work that they are not interested in pursuing. I would argue those are not candidates that you would want, though, because that's a huge priority of this organization.
Yeah, that in some ways dovetails on to this potential attraction of our climate initiatives, but certainly the transformation that we're looking at, that everybody will be going through, but we're more at the forefront, is going to be something that has a very strategic financial planning component to it. We have the folks in the utilities department who are pouring into this and trying to invent a wheel, and we don't have models for it, and so it really is going to take a lot of not only ingenuity and strategic thinking, but as I think it through, really collaboration outside of our organization with others who are struggling with the same issues. Just the evolution of this, in 2015, as we were getting ready to adopt our climate plan with the 80% reduction, I was immediately fixated on a question of what if all the leading researchers come up with on how you retire an existing utility, like a gas utility. And I wasn't getting much response here, and I hightailed it over when I was going to the Paris Climate Accord, but this was my focus mission, was to talk with the folks who were really grappling with this and had figured out what we hadn't figured out, but we wanted to execute. Well, the answer was nobody had an answer. They didn't even have an inkling. And so 8 years later, we're starting to have an inkling, but not answers. It's going to be a great challenge, but it's a really great opportunity. I mean, this is a big deal. And it's certainly not going to be the principal part of the role, but it'll be one of the most important parts in collaborating with our utilities department on how to accomplish this. Anyway, so yeah, you bet.
Appreciate that so much. And Ms. Black, I think without telling you how to do your job as a recruiter and interviewer, it strikes me that a very open-ended question that will elicit this kind of knowledge and vision from the right candidate would be great. The right candidate is anticipating that this is the issue for a city and for the utilities. And so it might be fun to just see how steeped are they in the realities we're all facing. And if they come out of corporate, maybe they're not focusing on that, or private equity or whatever, but maybe they are, I don't know, but I think that might be something we could be curious about.
Absolutely. So noted. And along those lines, no surprise, what I'm hearing too is this common theme of Palo Alto has such a pioneering spirit, right? And this is a perfect example of being on the leading edge, comfortable with not having things figured out, but committed to problem solving and constant innovation. That's a unique individual in the finance world, but there's no grander opportunity to come and create and use your genius. So that's how I fantasize about the perfect person for this job. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's, we pay competitive salaries for these positions, but certain candidates who would find this environment and these challenges as exciting versus daunting is probably the right person for the job for us. Yeah. Let's see, this was structured so that we just give feedback. Have we done that well enough?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Absolutely. And so much of this is in line with the city manager's executive competencies too. The only other thing I would add, which Ed includes in his list, is resiliency. Post-pandemic, that's the one characteristic we're really drilling down on is resiliency, because it's never been more important. So no, I thank you so much for your time. Kylie alluded to the fact that it is a difficult market for great talent. It's never been more challenging for a whole host of reasons. You all are familiar with that. This will be no different. I haven't found the right magic wand yet, but there are so many good things here to market, even though it's a huge job. I'm very hopeful, but well aware of the challenges and excited by the goals and the vision. So I thank you for your trust and your input.
Thanks. All right. So that moves us to our second item tonight, which is a discussion and Finance Committee recommendation on alternative to manage winter 2023 to 2024 natural gas price uncertainty. It's a mouthful.
Good evening, Chair Burt, council members.
Good evening, Director Batchelor.
Tonight, I have with me Carla Dela, who is our Assistant Director for our Resource Planners, and Jason Hong will be right back, who is our Resource Planner that did a lot of work at this. If you remember back, though, we came to you during our budget hearings and also during the council to talk a little bit about this significant increases in our gas pricing that happened in December, January, mostly in February timeframe. And one of the ideas that we had was we were going to come back to this group as well as to the council to talk about maybe a hedging program, some options that we wanted to take a look at. And so this is the first step in this to bring to you tonight to talk a little bit about some recommendations that we or options with some asking for some recommendations from all of you tonight. So as we go to, and we are planning on going to the council in September with this. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carla Davey.
Thanks a lot. Good evening. As Dean said, this was really inspired by the experience that we had last winter with the gas prices and the concern from the community. What we are asking for tonight is pretty narrowly focused on just this upcoming winter. We do have some potential actions that could or not be taken in the longer term, but we're really asking for a recommendation to council for this upcoming winter. Go ahead and advance the slide, please. Thank you. So just as a little bit of background, and I know Chair Byrd is very well aware of a lot of this history, but prior to 2012, we had a quite robust and systematic hedging strategy for our natural gas portfolio, whereby we purchased fixed price gas out as far as 36 months from the current day and layered in those purchases over time, so that as we got closer and closer to the delivery date, we were more and more locked in with fixed price gas, and 3 years out had purchased less of that fixed price gas. We did that primarily to stabilize costs and therefore stabilize the commodity rate that was charged to our customers. Generally speaking, we change that rate about once a year. And in the lead up to 2012, we saw a big increase in the amount of gas that was being produced in the US, primarily due to advances in fracking and a resulting glut of gas, and then resulting falling prices pretty dramatically for that commodity. At which point we found ourselves with a lot of more expensive fixed price gas in our portfolio, and a big difference between what our customers were paying versus surrounding communities who were PG&E customers. And so council adopted a change in the way that we bought gas and in the way that we passed that cost onto our customers to short-term purchases, monthly index-based price purchases, and then a commodity rate charged to our customers that was tied to that same monthly index price, changing every single month. That strategy kind of cruised along for 10 or 11 years without a whole lot of attention paid to it until January of 2023, where we, and I'll talk a little bit more about what we saw then. I would also mention that because even though we had this strategy, have still currently the strategy in place to pass that monthly market price-based rate through to our customers, council ultimately is the only body that has rate approving authority. And so in the rate schedule, in the gas rate schedule, there is a maximum price that can be charged for gas that council approves. That was set at $2 a therm, with historical prices in the sort of 30 to 50 cents. That was a maximum that was set with the intention that that was quite high, and that we would not anticipate being up close to that. With that, let me advance to the next slide and talk more about what we saw this past winter. So late in November 2022, we noticed that prices looked like they were rising pretty dramatically. We engaged in quite a lot of communication to our customers through social media, through our website, through all of our channels that we had available to us, to try and warn customers that we were seeing prices going up, and to encourage them to maybe turn their thermostats up a little bit in the cold winter months, and offered up some of the programs and different things that we offer to customers to help them contain their energy costs. We also went to council on the very last meeting of the year and asked that maximum allowed price be doubled from $2 a therm to $4 a therm. Again, thinking that was a very high price that we would be pretty safe from hitting. And the January monthly price actually settled at just below $5 a therm. So a whole dollar higher than that $4 that had been approved by council in December of 2022. As a result, the cost of gas that was passed through to customers for January 2023 was restricted to that $4 therm number, and we took about $1.8 million out of reserves to cover the difference. Next slide, please. Here's just I think a picture is worth 1,000 words sort of graphic of what we saw with this gas price. This was a pretty extreme spike, nothing like which we saw before, and it quickly came back down again. there were some fundamentals that were influencing prices at that time. It was a very cold winter. The war in Ukraine was raging. A lot of gas was pulled out of storage during the summer months when we experienced such high heat in the West. And so we as a region went into the winter with less gas in storage than some would like. That makes the markets nervous when there's not a lot of gas sitting in storage. Aliso Canyon down in Southern California has been constrained and not allowed to operate at full capacity since the leaks that happened down there several years ago. I don't recall exactly which year. But even with all of that, the state and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission have looked at what happened here in the Western United States and opened inquiries into that situation because it really only happened in the Western US, and the fundamentals were basically the same in October of 2022 and in April of 2023, and yet we saw this dramatic spike. So the state investigation just kicked off. They are estimating 36 months for the time frame to try and get through all of the information to potentially, or maybe not, figure out what happened during January 2022. In any case, prices did come down quickly right after that month and have continued to stay down, and forward prices today are in line with what we've seen historically. Next slide, please. So what we are presenting to you tonight are two alternatives for this upcoming winter. The first being the status quo: continue purchasing gas tied to the monthly market index, continue tying the retail rate to that same index and passing that cost through on a monthly basis, and utilizing our operating reserve only when the commodity price exceeds that maximum price. There's a longer term variation of our status quo strategy, which would be to create a separate and distinct reserve that we could, in essence, self-insure ourselves against a future price spike by building up that reserve over time with some amount of money over some amount of time to hold on to for a case like we saw last January. That would obviously take some time to build up that reserve and some more discussion and analysis about how the council would like to go about such a strategy. And so we are not asking for feedback directly on that, or that's not the motion that we have recommended tonight, but it is something to kind of keep in the back of your minds as you're thinking about these issues. Next slide, please. Some considerations for sticking with the current policy. Energy markets are inherently unpredictable and volatile. Prices can only go down to zero. There's no lid on how high prices can theoretically go. On the other hand, as I said, prices have stabilized, come down significantly since March of 2023, and look, at least right now, stable in the future. Our commodity rates have loosely tracked PG&Es over the course of the last 10 years. PG&E tends to be a little bit higher. We don't know exactly what their purchasing strategy is, but we do think that they have some hedging in place similar to what we are going to be talking about with our alternative, just based on back of the envelope numbers and what we saw happen with their rates in December and January of this year. Any sort of hedging activity does cost money over the long term. So looking over a 10, 15, 20-year period, our current strategy will yield the lowest cost for our customers. In any given month, that may or may not be true, but over the long term, that's true. Next slide, please. And with that, I'm going to turn over the discussion about the alternative that we'd like to offer up to my colleague, Jason Huang. He did a lot of work on this and a lot of analysis and a lot of market research to suss out what our what our options might be out in the gas market. So take it away.
Thanks, Carla. Pleasure to be meeting with you guys tonight to talk about this important item. I know it might be a little bit strange since it's 80 degrees outside that we're talking about cold weather and winter gas, but nonetheless, we are in the middle of making winter preparations and looking forward to your feedback and recommendation tonight. So as Carla mentioned, gas prices have dropped since March 2023 to under $1 per therm, and they have stabilized. And the California Public Utilities Commission and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission are investigating the prices. But given that we received so many inquiries and the customer bills were so high and there was a surge in prices, we started to explore different alternatives to see if we could try to limit the volatility and the risk that the utility would have if prices surged again. One of the strategies that we found in place that could limit kind of the risk that we could be implemented by this winter of 2023-24 is a gas procurement strategy called the cap price winter gas purchasing strategy. And so this one we felt that would be a good alternative to consider in addition to the status quo alternative. So the way that this cap price winter gas purchasing alternative works is essentially we continue to purchase gas at the index, so the index monthly price, but we buy it with a cap in place. And the cap in place that we would have is $2 per therm. So this $2 in therm is consistent with the cap or the maximum price of the commodity rate that we had before the surge in 2022-23, okay? And it functions as an insurance policy, this cap. So if the way that works is if the monthly index settles below $2 per therm, then we're just paying $2. We're paying that index, which is less than $2 per therm. If it rises to above $2 per therm, then we're only paying $2 per therm. So if it skyrocketed to $5 per therm again, like it did in January 2023, we would only be paying $2 per therm. Okay. Now, as Carla mentioned, there's a prices insurance. It's just like your car insurance, your home insurance. And so we went out and we tried to ask our current suppliers if they would be willing to offer a product that gave us this physical cap in place. And so we did get quotes, and the quotes ranged from a low end of 17.5 cents to 27.5 cents per therm. And so if you put this with the volume that we're considering, it would be 1.93 million to $3.03 million for our total cost. Now, we're only looking as part of this proposal to buy caps for December, January, and February. And the reason that we're doing that is historically, these are the most volatile months, the highest prices, the most demand. Market fundamentals dictate that these are the highest prices. And so since there's a cost to the premium, we would only be buying caps for these 3 months. But from the ratepayer side, we would want to spread this cost out to the ratepayers over their bills over the year. So they wouldn't be getting the charges only for the December, January, and February. So if you look at that calculation of the total cost of 1.93 or 3.03 million for the utility, then we would be applying an adder on the commodity charge on the monthly bill for each residential customer or each customer, commercial customer. And that would average out to 7 cents to 11 cents a therm. Next slide. Here's a better breakdown of what this looks like. The adder of 7 cents to 11 cents per therm for the total December through February price cap, it results ultimately in an increase of 4 to 6% in the median monthly residential bill over the year. Okay. It's a little bit higher in the winter months, 4% to 6% increase because of the volume that is used during winter, more gas during the winter. Over the summer months, April to October, it equates to about a 3 to 5% increase. But over the entire year, it's 4 to 6%. Okay, and so if you're looking at just the cost standpoint, the median residential bill for the winter is $99 or close to $100. This would add additional $3.78 or $5.94, resulting in 4 to 6% increase for the summer. Same thing, $40.52 is the median residential bill. Would result in 3 to 5%, and on an annual $65, the adder would be $2.31 to $3.63 to 4 to 6% increase. Now, as part of this proposal, we're also looking at a cap of the adder to 15 cents. Okay, so the quotes that we're getting are 7 to 11 cents, but we won't want to break the bank on this one. We would be willing to just look at procuring enough to equate to 15 cents a therm. Next slide, please. So what are the considerations for this alternative, the cap price winter gas purchasing versus just staying with the status quo? So obviously, if we put this this insurance policy in place, it will protect our reserves from price spikes. So last season, we experienced a 1.84 million drawdown from the reserves. It would be a lot less if we had this price cap in place because it's a $2 cap versus a $5 or potentially more if the market surge. It'll protect your customers from price spikes as well. So, hopefully we won't be getting as many inquiries or, city council and all you getting more complaints about the high bills. But there's cost. And so this would be a higher cost to customers in the long run because it's an insurance policy. Now, this is an insurance policy also that adds cost, and prices, they're below $1 per therm right now. They could stay down there. All the forecasts are saying that the winter prices right now are stabilized, definitely a lot lower than $2 per therm. So we could end up paying for this policy from our suppliers, but not even using it at all. So this proposal that we're looking for is just for 23-24. Okay. And this policy can also be renewed. So at the same time, when we're looking out for this price cap in the future, we will ask our suppliers next summer to see if they have different pricing. This price cap product is also a little bit uncommon. So we had to actually reach out to our suppliers and see if they could structure something for us, because this is a physical cap price policy versus a financial that maybe some other utilities do. Given that, the prices could change. If the price spikes more, if it's leading up to a higher spike, it could also not be readily available. So if there's a lot of volatility that's going on closer to winter, the suppliers may pull out and say they don't have the product anymore, or they may change the price, or they could just offer a partial volume of what we need. Okay. The last thing that we might want to consider is kind of what I mentioned before, is that the price of the caps will be higher if the market trends higher or if it's more volatile. And on the flip side, if things start and continue to be more stable, then the price caps will go down in price. Next slide, please. So this is the procurement strategy that we thought we could implement for 23-24, given your recommendation. But there are other alternatives that we are potentially considering for the future. So I'm going to hand it back to Carla now, so she can talk about that quickly.
Sure. And just to add to what Jason was saying about, we're looking at sort of a 5% increase in the customer's commodity bills for purchasing this insurance policy. We do see that's about the order of magnitude of how much less we have been historically than PG&E. So it is in line with what might be part of PG&E's strategy for hedging their gas prices. And to reiterate that, we think that PG&E might be doing something similar, and that they are probably using financial hedges to do that. We are precluded in our energy risk management policies from engaging in financial transactions. So what we would be doing is a physical gas purchase with a cap on the price. So it is a molecule that is going to be delivered. It's going to show up at the delivery point where we need it, but the price of it is going to be, we'll have a max on it. So it is a little bit of an unusual product. Most folks who do that type of hedging do it through financial transactions. So there are lots of other ways that we could be managing gas price risk. These are longer term, bigger discussions. Many of them would not only change the way we're purchasing gas, but would change the way we set rates. And so it becomes a bigger discussion. The beauty of the alternative that we've offered is that our rate setting methodology doesn't change, other than a cap gets added to it, but it's still a monthly market price that pass through. Likewise, establishing a reserve would leave our rate setting methodology intact. It would just take some time to build up that reserve, and we'd have to figure out how much money do we want, over what time period do we want to accumulate that money. And then these other alternatives either are full laddering strategy that we, or something similar to what we had pre-2012 or some more limited version of that where we were, potentially just buying fixed price gas for some portion of our winter needs to dampen potential impacts of volatility are certainly strategies we could consider. Those would also, I think, impact the way we'd want to set our rates. We don't want to set our rates tied to a monthly index if we have this mix of costs that are not all short-term costs that have some fixed price component to it. So it takes a little more time, a little more analysis. We have in the past looked at more fundamental ways of managing our prices by really going out and buying gas production assets. That's something that we have found not to be in line with the city's appetite for risk and just general norms of the way we operate, but it is one way to have more control over your costs. Gas storage is another way. We have found in the past that gas storage in almost all years does not pencil out. It's quite an expensive asset, and the investor-owned utilities who hold gas storage are required to hold it by the California Public Utilities Commission for reliability reasons. It doesn't generally pencil out for managing price risk in the winter. It's pretty expensive. So those are the things that are swirling around in our brains, but not on the table tonight. Next slide, please. As Jason said, and as Dean said, we are currently scheduled for council consideration on September 18th. We are really looking to this body to make a recommendation to council. If the Finance Committee does want to recommend the alternative purchasing strategy to council, that will come packaged to council with that 15-cent per therm customer commodity rate impact maximum, because council would obviously want to have some control over not just an open-ended paycheck for what staff would go out and spend on this product. We would be looking for some flexibility because we don't really know what we're going to find on the day that we go out to buy this product, how much it's going to cost, how much volume we could manage to cap the price of if the market's getting nervous and if they perceive more volatility for the winter, that will increase the price of this product. We would also need to have council approve a revised gas utility long-term plan strategy for purchasing and rate setting. It's very explicit in that council approved policy right now that we buy short-term on the monthly index and pass that through to our customers. So that will need to be revised. So that's the kind of thing you would expect to see should this alternative go to the full council. It would be a little more fleshed out with a little more of the meat on the bones than what you're seeing tonight in this presentation. But with that, because we need to buy ahead of the winter and because we would want to spread this cost out over the whole year, if we were going to implement this policy, we would need to start acting on that in October for the winter that starts in November, spreading that cost over the full year, November 1st, 2023 to October 31st, 2024. So that is why we are on kind of this fast track of asking for feedback about what we should do for this winter. Just as a side note, we had scheduled to go to the UAC with this discussion in August. They did not have a quorum and that meeting was not held. And because we really needed to speak to you now and get to council in September, we didn't have the chance to have this discussion with the UAC the way we would have liked to have. So normally we would have had that first and been able to share with you what the UAC's thoughts were. We were not able to do that. That's all we had, and we'd be. Oh, did I have something else? Oh, I've got one more. Oh yeah, the recommended motion. So it's it's a multiple choice recommended motion between the two bullets. And I think that I've said enough about both of them already. So I can stop talking, and we really welcome your questions, your thoughts, your feedback, and presumably a motion if you so choose.
Julie?
Thank you, Councilmember Burt. Thank you, Ms. Daly and Mr. Huang for your presentation. I'm gonna try to stick my dipstick in and see if I can come out with anything that makes sense. This is very new analysis for me, so I want to be sure I'm understanding it. I'm interested in the $2 decision that the cap would be $2. That's been our therm cap, but now we're buying insurance that will also promise that 2 is the cap. So I'm interested in why 2, not 1.9 something or 2.1, like what that number feels to me to be important in this. And feeling like maybe it ought to be a little lower so that we're actually guaranteeing we're protecting ourselves from, you know, a little bit more than what our former cap was to justify why we're charging customers more to pay for it, this insurance. So that's one question. The other is I do worry that you know, Palo Altans love the fact that our bills are cheaper than PG&E. And so if that optic goes away, even though we can explain it, right, we're protecting you from the big spike by putting an insurance in place that effectively is going to make the prices similar. I really do worry that something we cherish about our uniqueness, you know, we lose that. We lose that feather or that perceived feather in our cap. And my final question is really something I was talking with Councilmember Burt about before the meeting began. It is a little off topic, but related. As we envision a world that uses less natural gas, the price of the commodity is going to change. And I'm curious as to what we are predicting might happen. I realize it's just for this coming winter, but you know, when we think 10 winters ahead, you know, what are we anticipating is going to be happening to the cost of the commodity, presumably spread over fewer users here in this city as more people convert to electric. And I just wonder, you know, how we begin to hedge our bets around that. So those are my 3 questions.
So I'm going to let Jason answer. Well, if you want to, the longer term. So keep in mind the price of gas is much bigger than just Palo Alto. But yeah, what do you, how would you answer the question about the long-term price of gas given?
Yeah, I think from a Palo Alto standpoint, it's a little bit more complicated because of our policies that we're going to have in place and what we're trying to achieve here with the SCAP. But given the market prices, I can speak to that a little bit more. We do have forecasts that are 10 years out, and they do remain under $1 a term for 10 years out. Yeah. So there's not a substantial increase in those prices on the market side for gas.
And then to address your first points, I don't want to say $2 is arbitrary, but in some ways it is a little bit. You know, we did anchor on that because that was the pre-December, pre-January 2023 maximum price on the rate. If the cap price that we purchase is lower than that, that will be more expensive. And if it's higher, it will be less expensive. And so it is certainly within the council's purview to choose a different number. We resisted putting a lot of different data out there because even the cost that we put out there is a snapshot in time, and that the quote is literally good for 5 minutes. And so we don't know what a $2 cap will cost in September or early October if we are attempting to purchase that. And so we didn't want to portray more certainty about the cost of that than we have. But we could certainly, there are different numbers that would work.
It sounds like what we're saying is we've always protected you at $2 a therm, and we want to ensure we can continue to protect at no more than $2 a therm. We had a strange year where it rose to 4 and actually just under 5. We had a lot of consequences of that. We want to prevent that from happening again. So this is an insurance policy to protect us in adhering to the policy we've had for some time, which is the $2 cap.
I guess council was comfortable with that $2 number at one point in time based on something, and so we anchored on that.
But if I might follow up on that.
Sure.
This proposal would essentially, because we'd be buying it for those higher risk months, it's not quite the same as a $2 therm cap in theory. It's really annualized.
Right.
It's something significantly below that is by basically, we think we'd be chopping off the potential peak.
Yeah.
And therefore it'd be layered over the year.
Right. And it protects both the customer and our reserves, which is also different from what the council approved maximum price does today. That only protects the customer. It doesn't protect the utility and the reserves.
And I think my final question about the perception, the sort of PG&E versus us and how that's going to fly, it can obviously be narrated too very effectively. We have to do that work, but I just throw it out in case others have that concern as well. And
Well,
yeah.
I'll just add, it didn't go over real well with our ratepayers, not only the spike, but we were victims of a higher spike than PG&E.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
it's whether you have a small amount of pain spread over a period of time or a sharper one, and what do ratepayers care more about? Greer?
Thank you. Well, a lot of questions answered through the oral presentation, and Julie, you asked a few of my questions. One kind of follow-up though I had on this idea of our hope that we're going to see natural gas use diminishing, and this kind of conversation that's been coming up, just around the city and amongst various stakeholders, is the potential of a sunset date for natural gas. I'm curious kind of your thoughts on, we have this looking 10 years down the road, but we're really accelerating our SCAP and really hoping that just kind of starts to pick up exponentially. Do you have thoughts on how that's going to play into really the big picture? And I saw, the alternatives listed for future consideration. I know we're really not talking about that tonight, but kind of thinking, what length of time is staff really thinking long term, and how does that play with a potential sunset?
Yeah, I do think that that conversation does play into those longer term discussions. Certainly, even if purchasing gas production assets fit into the city's risk profile somehow, does that fit into the long term vision of Palo Alto weaning itself off gas? Maybe not. Even a laddering strategy of purchasing fixed price gas 3 years out. How do we want to take into consideration this plan to electrify the city and really move away from gas? Those are very valid points, and I haven't completely thought through all of those, quite honestly. Yeah, we're really just focused on this winter tonight.
And I mean, I know there's no official staff recommendation, but is there a general consensus? No.
No.
I will add that, for instance, if you did a scenario of market rate, then that takes care of it whenever we would phase down. But even if you laddered, you could structure contracts so that they have defined terminus dates. So
Yeah.
I think that's the least of our problems. Well, and I don't know about the least, but there are bigger problems, challenges, I'll say. With that.
So if we were to switch to the alternative option, you had the range of expected price increase per therm. Did it have on there? Oh, okay. Sorry, it does. The actual dollar amount that customers would likely see as far as an increase. Yeah, I'm interested here. your thoughts, Pat? I mean, I'd see definitely pros and cons to both. I mean, I don't like the idea that that with the alternative that we're agreeing to something that we know is going to increase the price on the average bill. And I don't want to just react to something that really seems to be, especially when we look at that graph, a true blip. And if that's not something that we're expecting to see again, I thought you made a really interesting point about all these different factors that were at play there. But we should have seen then a similar increase in October and April, but why during that point? And I'm glad the state and the federal government are investigating. It sure seems like something shady was happening to be able to cause something like that. I don't know. And if we're not going to get that answer for 36 months, I mean, it really doesn't unfortunately matter. But so that's where I'm kind of at. I think, how likely is it that blip's going to happen again? If it does, can we get those reserves up in time? Doesn't seem like we can. And so does it make sense? Maybe I'm a little more comfortable with the fact that if we do this, we're just doing it for this year, and these price increases aren't that significant for a 1 year hedging our bets just to see, do we see something similar again this winter? So I again see the pros and cons, but that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Well, I'll just kind of start with a philosophical discussion about insurance. If insurance didn't cost anything, people wouldn't be in the insurance business and making profit. And just as we have fire insurance and flood insurance and theft insurance, we pay something that, in theory, on average, if we didn't buy insurance, we'd, as a group, do better, but we'd run into certain big hits that we want to mitigate. That's what insurance is about. Then we've got self-insurance. And in a way, our reserve is a self-insurance. So can you compare and a couple of these things I need to refresh on, what we've been putting in to our reserve and how that, can we do a comparison to what this cost is? Because in theory, if we buy this cap as a form of insurance, it reduces what we would otherwise have to put in reserve. Now, we may still be needing to replenish that reserve because it got knocked out. But how do those things compare?
Yeah, so we did a little back of the envelope calculation of if the maximum price, if we wouldn't have raised the maximum price from $2 to $4 and the reserve took the entire hit, it was, remind me of the number, Jason?
If we didn't raise it to the maximum of $4, then we would have taken out $9.5 million out of reserves.
And so we compare that to 1.7 to 3.1 in 1 year.
Right.
And that reserve was built up over how many years? Or I don't know how to kind of gauge that. But so it's
sure.
interesting, basically, because that's in a way what we're comparing. We'd be paying for a cap that in theory over time would mitigate the need for us to have a bigger reserve to be able to do this. And the reserve is a form of self-insurance. So that's kind of the trade-off. It's as we're struggling through, this concern of, well, do we have a premium over PG&E? Historically, we always had a premium. I'm going back a couple of decades, premium on electricity. I don't think we had always been a premium on gas, and that was I was pleasantly surprised when I kind of in the last couple of years before this hit saw that we did have we were offering a premium, a lower cost than PG&E on gas, right up until we had this thing hit, and it appears that in some ways they were hedging and paying for that, and so that's where we are today. when did we have this council approved $2 therm cap, the charge cap? I didn't remember that.
I think that that's been in place all the way back to 2012 when we switched to a monthly pass through, and it really
It was on the books, but didn't really matter because it never came into play.
right. You know, it was really a legal thing that only council has the authority to set rates. You can't just have a monthly pass through with no bounds around it on the rate schedule. We have to put a number in there. What do you want the number to be? We said, well, $2 is pretty high. We probably won't hit that. And so that was, I think it's been at that number all the way from the beginning of that strategy up until
Okay,
just
it
this year.
It never materialized. So
Right.
we just didn't pay much attention.
We never hit it.
Yeah. And then the laddering, did you look at what we paid in certain premiums for longer term contracts and locked them in? And so in a way, that was another form of an insurance policy. I didn't see anything here that gave any sense of how laddering costs might compare to this cap.
Yeah, we didn't do that analysis. We did at one point look back at market prices and compare it to our laddering strategy costs. And over a long period, there was a small difference. You know, we paid a little bit more over the long term than we would have paid had we not had that laddering strategy in place. I don't remember exactly what that number was, but it wasn't drastic. It wasn't eye-popping, but there was a little premium that we saw that we paid.
And so why are you not looking at a laddering option at this time? Is it that it'll take more time to set that up, or are there other reasons?
I mean, I think it's a bigger discussion. It will take time to set that up. Is it a full laddering strategy? Is it a limited laddering strategy? What do we do with our rate setting policy? It doesn't make sense to have a laddering strategy and have a market based pass through rate to our customers. And so there's just more analysis that needs to be done there. Really honestly, we've been down a couple of resource planners on our staff and have a lot of other stuff going on, and we just haven't had the time to
so
spend
the
on it.
laddering would be kind of more complex to work through, and particularly if we had a hybrid approach of market and ladder.
Mhm.
Yeah, I had, I mean, I'm intrigued by the cap. I had thought that what was going to come back to us was some form of laddering. And it may be that this is a better approach. It's got some appealing characteristics to it. Let's see. Yeah, I guess I'll just share that as I had been in my own mind anticipating kind of a laddering approach, that one of the things that I've bragged about what we did in electricity with our renewables is that because a lot of folks outside of Palo Alto, well, how did you get to 100% carbon neutral and be 40 or now 50% below PG&E? And a lot of that was that the investor-owned utilities operated under the state mandates to go to certain percentages of renewables, and those lagged behind ours. We set 20% before the state did. When they said 20%, we went 33. When they went 33, we went for the moon. And so in each circumstance, we kind of had two advantages. And I just put this out there for our own thinking on possible gas-related approaches. We bought when others weren't buying in massive volume, because we're off kilter from the state mandates, which are much bigger buys from power purchase agreements than our smaller ones. And And so when the providers of those agreements were didn't have a lot of customers, we scooped in, but we did it with a cap on the impact on our ratepayers, a 0.5 cent a kilowatt hour, as I recall. We said, when we set the 20%, we'll only have this much impact on ratepayers. Is that correct? Yeah. And so we had two factors that gave us a framework that worked out really well. We said we won't pay through the moon if we set a goal, but if costs are too high, we're going to hold off on signing contracts. And second, by being out in front, we actually found ourselves in good positions in not buying those contracts when we were competing with everybody else in the state. And it was just a supply and demand flux. And there were other factors that went through at different times. But I think overall, that's what really did us right, that combination of those two things. And so as we look forward, I had in my own mind been thinking about, should we be thinking about giving staff a range of proportion of the of our gas commodity purchases that might be within different how much we would ladder and buy long-term contracts versus how much we'd be on the market. And if the price dropped, just like federally when the for the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, when the market dives, whatever reasons, all these things that fluctuate even more in petroleum, then that's when we'd buy. And we'd give latitude to say, if it drops below this point, you're authorized to go higher in your buys in those longer term contracts. It's still an imprecision, but we all see that the market does odd, unpredictable, kind of irrational things. Just like we still don't know why we had this big spike in January in the Western states. And trying to anticipate those oddities and fluctuations is tough. But taking advantage when it's clear to say it's a spike, let's not book long-term contracts when it's $4 a therm, or if it drops below 50 cents, or maybe that's the time to lock us in. So I don't know what we might want to do. I just wanted to toss that out there for future consideration as a possible strategic approach that would kind of build off of the successes we had in our electricity contracts over time. And it's not identical, but it's as comparable as I could have in my own mind.
Yeah, I think there are some pretty profound differences between what happens in the electric markets. There are different ways to produce electricity, and there are, contracts that we buy into specific projects. I think the analogy to that in my head is buying into a gas production field. That's more analogous to a power purchase agreement. We could certainly implement a strategy that had trigger points for buying fixed price gas. When we had the laddering strategy, we not 100%, but we're generally didn't take a market view and had a very systematic way of buying. We did have a market view in really specific cases. A hurricane is blowing in. Okay, well, I don't need to buy gas today. I can wait until next week. I'm going to wait until this thing blows over. So we had a little bit of wiggle room as staff to make those judgment calls. But we did not take a long-term market view, and we did not decide, we're going to ignore the laddering strategy for a year because we think prices are going to come back down to $2 or whatever it was. Sorry, we speak in MMBTUs when we're purchasing gas, and we speak in therms when we're talking about retail rates. So my apologies for, I think I just mixed those up a little bit by talking about $2, which would be the equivalent of 20 cents per therm. But yeah, I mean, we could we could implement a different strategy if that was
And I'm
council's
not
wish.
talking about trying to guess the market.
I know.
Yeah, yeah.
With the understanding that we might never ever buy, because if prices don't hit those levels, then
Have to have a new
yeah.
strategy. Okay, so coming back to the proposal before us, or the options, which are this cap or the just stay with the market approach. Let's go back to that discussion. Thoughts, Julie?
Yeah, I just had one follow-on, I think, to something Councilmember Stone said, Vice Mayor Stone, or it might have been you, Councilmember Burt. There's something about the shared risk with the proposed cap, that both the customers and the reserve are protected by it. Whereas without the cap, we raised our therms from 2 to 4, passed that through to consumers, and they bore that brunt. So it feels like an equitable share, that we know this could happen. Spikes are unusual, but if it does happen, and in order to protect us from it happening, we're going into this sort of insurance policy where both the city and customers are protected. I do like that. I realize it's unlikely that the spike is going to happen again. Although on the other hand, the factors you listed are all still in play, right? So how unlikely is it? We would all feel like fools if this winter the exact same thing happens. So I think for those reasons, I'm sort of in favor of, because we share we're both equally protected by it, the city and the city's reserves and the customers. And because, we don't want to look foolish this winter, I'm tending to feel in favor of trying the 1-year cap.
Yeah, I agree. Given that the price increase per customer is not that significant per month, I'd be curious to see, given it's the winter afterwards, do we see any other type of spike? I'd be shocked if it was as big, but if it's even a little smaller, that's significantly over $2 a therm. And the fact that we're just doing this as a 1 year, I'm comfortable with that right now.
I am as well. I'm probably in my own mind more focused on continuing some form of a insurance, whether it's this model or another one longer term. It's kind of under the analogy that if in this area, if we've had 3 straight years without mega fires, do we stop worrying about fire insurance? It's important to remind ourselves of, in this case, of what a crisis it was during this spike and how concerned our ratepayers were and how much it affected their perspective on the performance of our utility and our local government in general. And now that's kind of passed and we're going, oh, yeah, I sort of remember that. It was a bad thing at the time. It wasn't our fault, but in terms of how much our citizenry equated that with the performance of their local government, it was a big deal. And I think we're even with this, it looks like we're going to maintain competitive prices in gas, whether we're a little above or a little below PG&E, right in that range, it sounds like, and far below PG&E on electric, especially residential electric. So I'm good with that as well. So on that note, I guess from hearing folks, I'll move that we propose to the council, we do the second option, revise current strategy and implement the capped price winter natural gas purchasing alternative.
Second.
Great. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. That passes unanimously.
And Chair, I'll just state for the record that there's no request to speak.
Oh, thank you for reminding me. And great. All right.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And Kylie, any discussion on future meetings?
Just that I can confirm for the committee, obviously, I think you know, but just for the public, if they're watching, your September 5th committee meeting has been canceled in lieu of a full council meeting that evening. And so our next meeting collectively will be September 19th, which we do have some agenda items that staff's working on. I'm not quite sure if all of them will make it by then, but we will definitely have at least 2 items.
And those, excuse me, those items tentatively are what for the 5th and
So
19th?
typical items that we have in the month of September are, we'll follow up on some referrals. So we do have a couple outstanding referrals, things like evaluation of our print and mail services. So that's in progress that I think will either come back in September or October. We also typically transmit our CalPERS reports. So right around now, we get our CalPERS actuarial reports. In fact, I would not be surprised if those were in someone's email already. So we will transmit those to the council for that discussion on that item. And then there's one more that's escaping me. Oh, a public works project. They want to talk about financing at the water quality control plant.
And then the meeting after the 19th is which date?
It is October.
Oh, okay.
1 second. Apologies. Yes, it would be October 3rd and October 17th would be our October meetings.
Got it. And I see Director Batchelor has a follow-up question.
Sorry to come back to this. Our question was, would you prefer to have this as an open forum and as an action item for the council, or would you want to have this on a consent?
I'm thinking action item. It's an important enough decision. Is that agreed? Yeah. Okay.
Committee, if I might ask, if we run into a timing issue, just based on your agendas, I suspect staff wouldn't want this to be pushed out to an October date. This would need to happen in September. We will take first choice that it be an action item, but should we find your agendas packed, I'm curious your thoughts on it being on consent. And if so, remember, you always have the opportunity to pull the item.
Yeah, Julie?
I share the interest in our colleagues having the opportunity to really mull this over, because ultimately we're all on the hook out in the public for these prices. To what extent does the finance committee, do members of the council on the finance committee get to make a presentation? Because I would love for them to hear a concise summary of what we've discussed here without each one of us
If
having
it's
to wait.
consent, we would
No,
have.
on action, I mean.
Oh, on action. Typically, the chair would supplement
present?
the primary presentation would be by staff, and the chair might
Right.
have supplemental comments.
I guess that's what I'm suggesting, because I think it'd be a succinct way for the 3 of us to indicate our why without taking up time for each of the 3 of us to say stuff. So I would welcome your doing a summary.
And then what's also typical is if other committee chairs have some other point they'd like to make that the chair didn't, they're welcome to do so as well.
Mhm.
Okay, so we'll try to get it on agendized.
In
For non-consent.
September,
Yeah.
on action or consent? Yeah, so that's my concern, is I just don't
Yeah.
want to stop. So I think if the council or the committee is okay with staff taking the direction that the preference obviously is action, but should we be unable to do it in September on action, that it would come back as a consent item?
Okay,
I think it is on consent, because I took a picture of the city manager's presentation last night for the notable tentative upcoming council items, and it is not listed on September 18th.
and what else is on the 18th?
Priority development area in San Antonio corridor, Ellsworth Place, Stanford University Medical Center Development Agreement Amendment.
Stanford Agreement Amendment is probably pretty perfunctory.
Yeah, we looked at that though, and we thought it had to go on.
Yeah, but not anticipating a big discussion. Yeah. Yeah.
So we'll, like I said, we'll do our best, but as you can see, there are some important timely items. So if we're unable to, if the committee is okay, we will put it on consent.
Okay,
Thank you all.
Thank you.
thanks.
Thanks, Dean.
And on that note, the meeting's adjourned.